afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar on ISO 27001-2022, Transition Policies and Staff Awareness Training. I'm Alan Calder. I'm the founder and executive chairman of IT Governance, and I will be your speaker through this afternoon. The webinar kicks off now. We have an hour scheduled for the webinar. The outbound bit, that's me talking, will probably be about 40 to 45 minutes, and there is a big chunk of time available for questions at the end. You will all have noted that you are on automatic mute. That's deliberate. That's how we can avoid background noise and all of those kind of issues, but we would love to take any questions that you've got. There is in the GoToWebinar panel, which should be on your screen, a chat box which is called questions. Please do type any questions that you've got into that box as and when they occur to you. So at any point during the webinar, if you have a question, just type it into the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel. And then when we come to the Q&A section at the end, we will pick out each of the questions. We'll share the question with the audience, and I'll have a go at answering the question. So do feel free, anything you would like to ask, just go ahead and do that. My own background, I've been in cybersecurity and information security time. I led the very first organization that achieved accredited certification to what is now ISO 27001. It was then BS 7799, so back in the late 1990s it was. The book I wrote about how a board should go about leading and developing information security management systems went on to become the Open University's postgraduate textbook. We're heading towards the 8th edition of it, which should be out in and I've written a number of other around information security governance. We did an awful lot of work around EU GDPR, enough for us to be very clear about the link between data protection and cybersecurity. And as a business, IT governance has grown to be one of the leading companies in information security. So we have a comprehensive ISO 27001 products and service offering, which we make available to more than 12,000 clients now across all 5 continents. We're primarily focused on IT governance, risk and compliance. And if you think of information security or cybersecurity as being about 3 domains: people, process, and technology. You can buy lots of technology to deal with cybersecurity, but it's people and process which is where the issues are. And IT governance as a company, we focus on the governance, risk management, and compliance, the people and process aspects of cybersecurity. We've been doing that for 20 odd years. We've got about 200 staff, and we deliver services which range all the way from strategy through to management system structure, through to penetration, and any one of the standards and frameworks, and there are a growing number of those that form part of today's increasingly complex environment. We also work in partnership with a very small number of organizations, independent organizations like ourselves, and this webinar in particular is being put on in collaboration with Perry Johnson Registrars. Perry Johnson is one of the world's biggest certification bodies, accredited certification bodies, and our relationship is an informal one. It's a recognition by Perry Johnson that we're very good at implementing ISO 27001 and other management systems, and a recognition by IT governance that Perry Johnson is very good at certification of management systems. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague from Perry Johnson just briefly to themselves in a moment, but by going to either one of us, and as I said, we are independent organizations, you can get a seamless experience to implementing a management system. But let me just give Perry Johnson a moment or two to talk for themselves.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Parker Hollis. I'm on the marketing team at Perry Johnson, and we will be doing questions and everything later at the end of the presentation. So I'll give it back over to Alan for now. But my contact information is also available if you have any questions about our side of things.
Great, thank you, Parker. So today's subject is not going to be all of the expertise that we've delivered over the years. We've done a whole lot of very substantial high volumes of projects, both big projects and small projects, but we've helped something like 1,300 organizations either prepare for or maintain ISO 27001 compliance. And a lot of that expertise is what you're able to draw on this webinar today. It informs how we talk about the transition from 27001 2013 to the new version of 27001. And today's agenda looks very simply at policies, procedures, and objectives, staff awareness and training in the context of 2022, what a effective communication system around security incidents and security events might be, some simple strategies for integrating 27001 requirements into existing processes and systems, a couple of tips around what makes a transition effective, and then looking at the cyber platform in terms of facilitating policy development, incident management, and in particular, the long-term support of management systems. And increasingly, we're seeing organizations recognizing that ISO 27001 certification, to coin a cliche, is a journey, not a destination. Getting certified is really the first major step on a path towards building a long-term integrated approach to cybersecurity and privacy inside an organization in a way that delivers genuine business results for the organization. So that's the agenda for today. I'm going to kick off by looking at policies, procedures, and objectives, the governance, risk management, and compliance part of ISO 27001. The new standard, the 2022 version, which was published in October last year, had quite a long period of gestation. The 2013 version of the standard is nearly 10 years old, and there have been quite a lot of changes, particularly in the nature of cybersecurity controls and definitely in the nature of the threat environment. So updating the standard, making sure that the management system clauses, that's clauses 4 through 10, continue to be meaningful, and bringing the controls into line with what are appropriate in the current environment. The standard set and reference standard set of controls in Annex A of ISO 27001 has been a big component of this transition. And the new standard really does reflect change organizations manage information security. That's primarily, as I said, in the controls. And we'll look very briefly at the controls themselves shortly. But looking at the management system standard, and so for all of those of you who already have an ISO 27001 management system or who are have started on the process and understand what it is, there are the major clauses are clauses 4 through 10 of ISO 27001, and the 2022 standard has exactly the same structure as the 2013 version of the standard, so it's the same overall. There are 10 clauses, but the first 3 clauses are basically introductory. It's clauses 4 through 10 that set out what you must do in order to have a management system which can be audited to and certified as complying with ISO 27001. And there have been some changes in each of those clauses since 2013. The changes are not significant in terms of massive rewriting. They're minor, but you do need to pay attention to all of them because your management system, if you're transitioning, needs to reflect the new management standard. When you have your recertification or transition audits, you will be audited against ISO 27001 2022, and certification audits will be looking specifically to see that the changes in the standard have been incorporated into your management system. So in terms of context and scope, that's clause 4, and clause 4 is a clause which often is underrated by people putting together a management system. It's the clause which tells you to determine scope, but it particularly says you need to pay attention to business, regulatory, and contractual requirements in determining what the scope of the business might be, but also what the controls might be inside the organization. In other words, you don't have to have a risk assessment in order to determine that there is a control that you need in order to meet a regulatory or contractual obligation. So the change in clauses. In clause 4, first of all, it says that you must identify the relevant requirements of interested parties. The 2013 version just says identify requirements of interested parties. That leads to confusion over, they might require quality processes. Do we have to reflect those in ISO 27001? Now it's just relevant requirements. So relevant to information security. That's the subject of ISO 27001. So that's what is required. And the second change is that the ISMS must now explicitly include processes needed and their interaction. So this is processes needed for information security and their interactions with assets and with third parties outside the organization. So it's clearly focusing on processes rather than entities, because you control the process, and how you control the process might be reflected in a contract with a third party, but the scope of the management system now explicitly must include all processes that are needed for the organization to achieve its information security objectives. And the changes in the planning clause, and clause 6 is typically where we deal with planning. Information security objectives must now be monitored and made available as documented information. It was previously simply a requirement that there are information security objectives. You now need to document them. And that means you need to think about how you reflect them in the policy of the organization and how they reflect on the business objectives. Information security management is to be a way in which the business is able to improve its progress towards achieving its objectives, and the documentation of information security objectives should capture that idea and should link to maybe business plans, maybe other public documents, but be very clear this is what information security is about, and that's how it's going to help us achieve our business objectives. The other change in the clause is a requirement that if you're going to change your ISMS, you plan how you're going to change it. And you would be doing that anyway if you use something like the Plan, Do, Check Act model for continual improvement, but it wasn't a specific requirement that if you made changes to the ISMS, you should document that and have a plan for it. It is now. And if you think about the fact that if you have a current ISMS and you're going to change it, the first place that you might evidence your answer that requirement is by planning the transition from ISO 27001 2013 to 2022. And I'll touch briefly on what that plan might look like shortly. In terms of support, usually clause 7, the requirements to define who will communicate and the processes for effecting communication have simply been required by replaced by a requirement to define how to communicate. So it's got simpler, enabled you to have a broader range of options. So how to communicate might be, we have outsourced this to a company who deal with all of our issues like this, or we have an internal communication strategy. He has a link, but it makes it much easier for you to integrate your ISMS into the broader group communication strategy rather than needing to define specifically who will communicate and what the processes will be. So that's a useful simplification. In operation, that's clause 8. The is to establish criteria for processes that you've identified in clause 6, to processes to implement the actions that you've identified in clause 6. And clause 6, of course, is also where you're doing risk assessment. So you're determining what the risks are, what the likelihood and impact of those risks materializing might be, and therefore, in terms of compliance under clause 8, what are the criteria that you're going to use to determine what controls you put in place, how you deal with managing the risks. And this will link into the attributes of controls, which ISO 27002 introduces for the first time. And again, I'll touch on those briefly. Organizations are now required to control externally provided processes, products, or services relevant to the ISMS rather than just processes. That goes back to the definition of scope, which must now explicitly include processes needed and the interactions between those processes. So you need to identify processes as part of the scope, and as part of managing the risk in those processes, you now are required to control the processes which are provided externally, processes, products, or services provided externally. So there's obviously a link between clause 4 and clause 8. Clauses 9 and 10 deal with performance and evaluation. The emphasis now is that methods to monitor, measure, analyze, and evaluate the effectiveness of the ISMS should produce comparable and reproducible results. And that's been a requirement in terms of risk assessment since pretty well day one, that how you do a risk assessment should produce comparable and reproducible results, which kind of always been difficult to do on a spreadsheet, gets more so. Now the way in which you monitor, measure, analyze, and evaluate the effectiveness of the ISMS should also be demonstrably a way of, be done in a way that produces comparable results. If somebody else goes through the process rather than whoever you normally use to do it, the results should be similar. There should be a documented, clear process, and that the outputs from management review or the outputs from internal audit should be consistent over time. The other requirement change is that management review, that's the requirement in clause 10, should consider changes in the needs and expectations of interested parties. And interested parties, you remember we defined in clause 4, one of the interested parties would be data protection regulators, might in the US be state laws, enforcement of state laws, and the addition of this requirement in terms of management review is a good way to make sure that you are consistently paying attention to changes in the threat and regulatory environment. This would include customers, are being formally identified and built into your management system. And as I said, the changes are happening on such a scale and with such rapidity, particularly for organizations operating internationally, that this is a really useful and important clause to have in place. So changes to, if you like, the detail of implementation, but no real change in terms of the overall structure and approach to planning and implementing an ISO 27001 management system. The much bigger changes are in Annex A. And Annex A, you'll remember, is a referent control set, so as you can use controls from anywhere that's appropriate, but they need to be linked to the list of controls in Annex A so that there is a common point of reference for all organizations looking at an ISO 27001 management system. 27001-2022 in Annex A lists 93 controls, so that's a reduction from the 114 that were in the 2013 version of the standards. And those controls are grouped into 4 themes rather than the 14 clauses. No controls have been removed, a number of them have been merged so that it's got simpler, and then there are a number of completely new controls. So the new controls are, remember, a control is a method for mitigating likelihood or impact, mitigating risk, is threat intelligence, information security for use of cloud services, and that control you might broaden out, for instance, by implementing ISO 27017 or 18 as part of the scope of your management system, because they give you a much more specific set of controls around cloud security, and depending on the nature of your customers and customer requirements, that might be an appropriate step for you. Anyway, ICT readiness for business continuity, I'll touch on that a bit later. Physical security monitoring, configuration management, information deletion, a big issue for many organizations, particularly after EU GDPR came along and required that organizations have very clear limitation how long they hold data. Those limitations are linked to the appropriate use of the data, and the data is deleted, personal data is deleted at the end of that period. Monitoring activities, web filtering, and of course secure coding. We've all seen the major disasters inflicted on many organizations when hackers have broken into software companies and been able to put malware into a code update, which has then been released to thousands or hundreds of thousands of organizations. So secure coding is a critical area of new controls. So new controls, you're going to need to think about which of those do we need, how relevant are they, and then the existing 93 controls are now in 4 themes: organizational, technology, physical, and people. So taking my people, process, and technology area, you can see the organizational and people controls fit into the people and process, technology and physical is about the environment within which the technology and the people sit. Technology controls is the third domain. So ISO 27001 gives you controls for governing your technical and people controls. It gives you controls for people and process. It's a complete suite of controls. Every one of the controls also now has 5 different types of attributes, and that's been done to make it easier to categorize and determine which controls to use. So the control type is the first aspect. It's a control, could be preventive, detective, or corrective. So it's preventing a threat from materializing, it's detecting it when it does, or it's correcting it after it's happened. So business continuity plan is a corrective control. It's about getting systems back up and running after they've been breached. A detective control might be something like a internal CCTV camera, which identifies somebody's got into a server room or is in a secure area inside the business. A preventive control are obvious things like firewalls, locks on doors. So control type helps you think about where you're deploying the control in terms of mitigating those risks. Second is information security properties, confidentiality, integrity, availability. You'll remember that 27001 is built around the logic of the 3-legged stool, that good information security is about appropriate levels of protection for the confidentiality, availability, and integrity of information. You don't protect one more than the other, you protect them appropriately. And controls having those attributes enables you very easily to say which of these attributes is it, 1 of them, 2 of them, 3 of them, that this control is serving to mitigate. Cybersecurity concepts: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, deals with the kind of process of cybersecurity, and I'll come back to that when we look briefly at incident management. Operational capabilities: so who's likely to own the risk? Is this a governance risk? Is it a management risk? Because remember, risk owners have to sign off on risks, so being able to identify the capability to which the is useful. And then finally, security domains: is this a governance area? Is it a protection, defense, resilience area, etc.? Because again, it may well be that you think about how you structure cybersecurity in terms of domains. Now, you don't have to use all of those attributes, because those are attributes in ISO 27002, which, if you remember, is a guidance standard. It's not a implementation standard. So all you have to do when you're looking at Annex A is recognize that the controls are sorted into 4 groups and to work within that concept. Sensibly, though, you will draw on the attributes in ISO 27002, set out very clearly, to help you determine how to apply those controls. And as you are looking at making the transition to 2022, you want to think very clearly about how you're going to use the attributes, and you want to write those into your risk assessment methodology. Formal change timetable: everybody needs to know what that looks like. This is what was published back in October 22, when 27001 was first published, and the requirement was that accreditation bodies, that's ABs, had 6 months to get themselves ready to assess certification bodies for compliance to ISO 27001. Do they have a capability to audit 27001? And the transition of certification bodies, CABs, had to be complete. So all certification bodies were required to be in a position to certify their clients 27001 2022 within 12 months of the last day of October 2022. So by the last day of October 23, which is now just around the corner. CABs have to begin, therefore, certifying no later than 12 months from the publication date. Many were ready to go within a matter of just months. And the transition has to be completed within 36 months. So organizations that have an ISO 27001 2013 certificate, that certificate will automatically cease to be meaningful at the end of October 2025, because the management system will now be 2022 version. And the reality is that with effect from pretty well about now, but you could extend it out a bit further if you need to, most certification bodies will only want to certify to ISO 27001 2022. If you have an existing 2013 certification going on, you should get on with it and get it finished. Just make sure you achieve certification preferably within the next 3 to 6 months. Talk to your certification body, make sure that they're on board with what your timetable looks like, and then you can make the conversion later on. But in reality, if you have an ongoing certification project, it's probably sensible now to think about shifting and beginning to build in the 2022 requirements and thinking about the new Annex A rather than continuing down the route of 2013. The reason for this kind of extended transition period, of course, reflects the fact that handling a new standard. Certification bodies have to have certification schemes in place. They need trained auditors. Implementation companies need to be in a position where they can help. People need to get new training qualifications. All of that takes time, and you can't start the process of doing any of that until you know what the standard looks like. So the standard has to be published, and hence the transition period. So that's what the official timetable looks like, and our advice now is to companies is just get on with it. Think about getting certification to 2022. ISO 27002 makes the transition quite easy because they identify very clearly what the link is between the existing 27001-2013 control and what the new control identifier is. So in terms of planning your transition, you just go to 2022 and you go, okay, I've implemented all of these controls. They're in my statement of applicability. What's the new control? And you just simply map it. So that bit's really easy. The issue you've got to think about is where you're merging controls. You've got to think about the merger in reality, and you've got to think about what you're going to do with the new controls. And I'll touch on those when we come to look at information security risk assessment shortly. And here we are, information security risk assessment. ISO 27005 has also been helpfully updated. The changes in ISO 27005, which is the guidance on risk assessment, has only really been quite simple. It's been designed to bring it into line with ISO 27001-2022. It's a guidance standard. You know, all organizations, when thinking about how do we do risk assessment, need to find a practical way of doing it. You don't want to be making up your own process. You've got no idea whether it's a best practice approach or not. ISO 27005 is one best practice approach that you could use. 27000 does not mandate how you do risk assessment. You can't be audited, therefore, against ISO 27005. It provides good guidance, and it's a pretty solid form of guidance. It reflects what is in ISO 31000, which many organizations use at the enterprise level for managing enterprise risk. The process is much the same in ISO 27005. And the useful thing about a standard like this is it gives you reproducible, consistent, valid results. So ISO 27005, worthwhile thinking about as you look at bringing your risk assessment up to the 2022 requirements. Now, the impact is different on different people. For certification bodies, and there'll be a number of people on this call who are auditors or work for or work within certification bodies, the transition arrangement has to have been made, and in most cases has already been made, but has to be in place by the end of October 2023. And the transition arrangements for looking at client's transition has to include how is the client addressing the changes in 27001, what gap analysis are they doing in order to put together a transition plan, and the CAB can then do a certification audit 2022, either as part of its ongoing surveillance or as part of a specific recertification audit, or it could be a separate audit. So in other words, you can talk to your certification body about what you think will work for you, and the transition audit, you then, it's a commercial arrangement, you will get on with it on whatever basis makes sense. So we normally advise people to say, just build it into your upcoming next CAB surveillance visit or recertification audit, depending on what your timetable looks like. So it's easy for the CAB to prepare. They need to know what they're doing, of course, and the CAB is only going to be able to rely on the transition does not have to rely on a document review. The transition audit can simply be fine. We're now going to do the recertification audit. We'll do it the normal way, except we will review you against 27001-2022. Where's the gap analysis? That's a requirement. How have you updated the statement of applicability? How have you updated the risk treatment plan? If you change the statement of applicability, that automatically means the risk treatment plan has to change. And how have you implemented and how are you measuring the effectiveness of any new or changed controls that you put in place? The CAB can do the transition audit remotely. It depends entirely on whether they can satisfy themselves that the transition audit objectives have been met. So again, that's a matter for you and your certification body to have. It's a commercial discussion to have. So that's the transition issues. Let's talk a bit about staff awareness and training around information security and ISO 27000. You need to train staff on the transition. Competent staff is important, so of course you need to make sure that your lead implementers and lead auditors upgrade existing ISO 27001 2013 certificates to 2022 versions. You can go on an ISMS conversion course, which will in a single day take you through what the changes are, enable you to pass an exam which will upgrade your certificate. There's a brief note towards the end of this webinar about how you can do that, but you need to make sure that you have people who are competent in ISO 27001 2022. So that's part of your internal planning. You're putting together a transition plan. Who's going to lead it? Who's going to audit it? How do we get them the skills that we need? This is a good opportunity to refocus staff on what ISO 27001 is all about. Why do we do certification? What's the transition plan? How do we get more people involved? Particularly once an organization has been operating an ISO 27001 management system for some years, it kind of becomes part of the way of life. This might be an opportunity to refocus staff on the benefits of 27001 to the business objectives. That documenting business objectives and being clear about those is a good opportunity to make sure that all staff understand. And of course, communicating about information security is a very good part of dealing with upcoming threats. So using internal communication channels to regularly share relevant updates, threat and risk information, security tips. If you're doing weekly, daily briefings, however you're doing it, information security should be a staple and fundamental part of what you're doing in terms of internal communication. Just like health and safety, just like quality, cybersecurity, information security is a critical communication area for organizations. And it's critical because human beings are the weakest link in your information security chain. Human beings will make errors, they will introduce, they will have trigger breaches, and you need people to recognize they've done them and to report them quickly so that you can help them deal with it. What we do, for instance, as part of helping people understand how to report, we have in our learning management business, in our staff awareness business, a breach module, which is like a game, so people can score themselves on their understanding of is there an incident, have they dealt with it properly, and that can help you create a proactive security culture. And that's an important part of managing information security in the long run, is security culture inside the organization. And of course, you should recognize and reward people who are demonstrating exemplary security practices. They're the leaders, the goal, the trend setters, the exemplars that you want other people to look at. And those really senior management. You want senior management to be amongst the key leaders, ways demonstrating what good information security looks like. Untrained staff are a data breach or cyber incident waiting to happen. Frankly, most technical solutions are reactive. They respond after an attack. Most organizations now will have software that identifies what looks as though somebody's opened a phishing email. They've opened it. That's why you're identifying it. You need to get people not to open phishing emails. So training staff on how to identify and prevent an attack is a key part of your training program. Yeah, you need resilience, you need defense in depth, which includes the technical solutions, but first you need to recognize that human beings are your biggest weakness. There is a kind of saying, which is that if you think that technology is the way to solve your cybersecurity problems, then you don't understand the problems and you don't understand cybersecurity. So you need to have technical solutions, but from a governance, risk management, compliance point of view, the risk that you've got to deal with is the phishing, social engineering risk. Attackers know that's the simplest and fastest way into organizations, which is why there has been an ongoing huge growth in the number of phishing and social engineering attacks and in the type and quality of those attacks. And of course, with AI now available for criminals to use, those attacks are going to get ever more sophisticated and ever more effective. So you've got to be thinking in cybersecurity terms about human beings. Human beings make mistakes. They click on links they shouldn't. It's not malicious, but they click on a link or do something which will trigger a cybersecurity attack. Opening an email they shouldn't, clicking on a link that they shouldn't. Teaching staff, and this is a regular item. We know that we sometimes run a training program over a year with repeated sessions for clients before they get the number of people who will make the mistake of clicking on a link or opening something down into the single figures. People quite often have to be exposed time and again for it to sink in, for it to become part of the culture. But it's once you've clicked on a link and it's downloaded and you haven't captured it, you could then be dealing with a major multi-million-pound to recover incident, something which has significant regulatory or reporting repercussions, could affect share price. All of those things can come from just one person making a single mistake. Remember, attackers only have to be successful once. They just need one person to do something you don't want to do. You have to be 100% successful. You've got to block and deal with every single attack. And so staff awareness, thinking about that front line of a cyber defense in depth, of a resilient approach to cybersecurity, is an important part of building an ISO 27001 culture. So you need to build a training program. Identify what staff need to learn, and this is about both staff awareness generally and about specific skills. What specific cybersecurity or privacy or GDPR or California Privacy Act or new SEC regulations training do specific people need in order to carry out the more detailed components of their roles? What general information does everybody need? What does management need to be able to exercise their governance, risk management, compliance responsibilities? So you need a training program built around, first of all, which staff need to learn. So identify that, then get on with it, train them, put people on outside courses, professional training courses, get trainers in to deliver training if you've got a large number of people who can be trained in one hit. But tackle training, deploy staff awareness training, which is done more often than just once a year. This is more than just, like anti-money laundering or anti-bribery compliance, where doing the course once a year is enough. For cybersecurity, it's not enough. You need to be regularly updating, particularly around phishing awareness. And then you should be measuring effectiveness. Just training is not enough. People will pay attention in the training course, they'll do enough to pass the exam, and the next day they'll go and click on a link that they shouldn't. So while you do informal tests, interviews, mostly that will be helpful. What you should really be thinking about is, do we have some form of testing of competence inside the organization beyond certifications, beyond professional certifications? So if we're doing phishing training, do we also have some simulated phishing attacks run which enable us to identify in a safe environment how many people haven't learned from the training course? So you need to think about how you're going to measure the effectiveness of training. And remember, training is one of the requirements in clause 7. It's a control in Annex A. And so you're going to be thinking, when you're looking at management review, at how do we measure the effectiveness of training. That's a requirement. So it's worthwhile just saying, actually, how do I measure the effectiveness of training? It goes all the way back to a training program. What do staff need to learn? How do I know that they've learned it? How do I test that? So enough on training. Part of developing a resilient cyber defense in-depth ISO 27001 management system is also thinking about reporting security incidents and security events and what the communication should look like around all of those. As I said, human beings are going to make mistakes, so you need to have a method of capturing those. You need to have a policy which deals with incident response. You need to have playbooks that deal with all the most common types of incidents and people trained on how to deal with what happens. You don't want to be working it out for the first time when it happens. You test your responses, you learn the lessons from them, and then you build a communications plan around what you've learned, both in terms of your planning and in terms of the incidents that you have. And so your typical communications plan, incident response plan, will recognize, first of all, that you have different types of incidents, major big ones that management team might need to be involved in. You have other incidents that need investigating and dealing with, but they're not life-threatening. Then you have events, something that you probably just want to track the numbers of. And so stopping phishing emails at the firewall, that's not an incident, that's perhaps an event, you just want to know how many are stopped and where they stopped. So you need to be very clear about what you're going to do with each, because the clarity enables you to put together a plan which recognizes in the long run, if a system goes down, how are you going to get it up to normal level. And building a plan around business continuity means that you can build a recovery profile which gets you to business as usual much more quickly than if you, again, try and work it out when it's happening. And business as usual is not necessarily just thinking about the whole business has been taken offline, but a particular system or process is offline. How do we get that back to business as usual quickly? What's our playbook for doing that? So, incident response process is a 6-phase approach. The first phase is detecting it. So what are the indicators, the sources of detection, what is showing up in our log? We have people identify stuff that's happening. And then how do we report that? So how do we capture the information? We say to people, report it through the help desk. That gives you dates and timestamps. You can automate the collection of quite a lot of data. You can force people to tell you key things when they report it. You don't want the reporting to be so long that people don't do it. And that's a key component of staff training and awareness, the detect and report phases of your incident response process. You then need people trained on doing investigation. What happened? When did it happen? All of those kinds of aspects. And to do triage. What are the business impacts? How do we deal with this particular incident? What's its level of activity? Is it critical? Is it just an incident? Is it just an event? Actually, we don't need to do anything about it. What are the implications for privacy? Is there personally identifiable information which has been compromised? Do we need to notify an authority? Do we need to talk to our lawyers? If we've got European citizen data in there, European resident data, is there a data controller we might have to notify? We probably need to tell our cyber insurers. All of that needs to be happening at the triage stage. You then get on with it and act. And so triage needs to happen quite quickly. You need to be trained around that. You need to have a real competence around triage. You might have an outside party that helps you with triage. You may well have an outside party that helps with action. But you need to get into action fast, containing the incident before it overwhelms a team which is probably just about sufficient for dealing with business as usual. When you have a major incident, I promise you, the team is overwhelmed within a matter of hours with people saying, I can't access this, the system is down, what do I do with that? They're just trying to deal with all of the, what do I do? So you need to contain the incident before it overwhelms the staff and overwhelms the team. And that's about playbooks, working out what might happen, testing it, running the playbooks, making sure they work. And then you need in all of that to gather evidence, and you trigger your communication plan. You need to talk to people who are affected by the incidents. And there's a key bit of planning which says for each, and think about those playbooks, for each incident, who needs to know, how do we communicate, who's going to handle that communication. If you're a listed company, at some point you probably need to tell authorities, you might need to tell shareholders. And then you get on with recovery. And you should continue updating your comms as you get on with the recovery and follow-up. So rebuilding systems, testing them, making sure they work, putting in place the security measures that you maybe should have had in place in the first instance. And then it's all the follow-up, learning from the incident, the root cause analysis, what was the business impact, finalizing any reporting that you have to do. And all of that, again, should be also covered in management review. We had an incident, this is how we dealt with it, this is what we learned from it, this is how our management system did or didn't cope. And so incident response, critical to the business survival, critical to the communication plan, also a key part of management review and a key part of ISO. So just integrating those requirements into your existing management system. And I'm assuming for the moment that you have an existing system, but even if you're just implementing for the first time, the process is the same. Senior management buy-in and support, essential. Internal comms plan, how do we tell the business what this is about, what the objectives are? If you're making a transition, a gap analysis, that's a transition requirement, but it's also a sensible starting point if you're implementing for the first time, because the reality is you will have in place a number of controls already, you will have in place a number of the procedures already, so you may as well start with a gap analysis. What have we already got? That enables you to plan what you need to do. Clauses 4 through 10 is the governance, risk management, compliance stuff. Annex A is the control set. Out of that comes an implementation plan for implementing the management system. And big part of that will be your risk assessment. Remember that your risk assessment isn't the starting point for all controls. There are a number of controls you put into place because in clause 4 of your management system, meeting clause 4 requirements, you will have identified business, regulatory, and contractual requirements around controls. And the fact that there's a contractual requirement is the only reason you need to put a particular control in place. So remember, privacy and third-party risk. Customers are third parties, suppliers are third parties, and think about how you're going to use control attributes and tie those into the risk decision. So update the risk assessment, roll out the new or changed risk treatment plan, start seeing how the controls work, measure and monitor, and then audit the management system. If it's a change, focus on the changes. If it's you then go into management review, focus on the objectives of the management system and how the changes have been put in place to help the organization achieve those objectives, and then you go for your certification or recertification audit. But that's pretty much the plan for all management system implementations. It's a good logical approach to how you might go about managing your transition or managing ISO 27001 in the first place. Risk assessments are, as I've already said, a critical part of the transition process. The new controls in Annex A will either have to be linked to a business, regulatory, or contractual requirement identified in line with clause 4, or there will need to be a risk decision that says we have this risk in order to mitigate it, we're putting this control in place, or you will need an explanation as to why the control has been excluded. Remember, risk treatment plan reflects statement of applicability. Statement of applicability is, have we implemented the control, yes or no? If yes, linked to risk treatment plan. If no, why not? Identify valuable assets. Assigning a value or criticality level to each asset enables you to tie it into the thinking about incident process, whether it's a critical minor event. That's a kind of helpful way of doing that. You need to be, in any case, mapping data flows. That's a privacy requirement that ties into identifying valuable assets. And then you have the threat and vulnerability exposure. So identifying existing controls in your existing systems. Is there a residual exposure which might lead to putting different controls or additional controls in place? Identifying how risks will impact CI or A or assets. Drawing on whatever practical information you've got that helps you consistently assess likelihood and impact. And then make sure that you've evaluated the risks and the ties around severity and impact on the organization's objectives. So it could be a serious breach, but it has a minor impact. You might not rush to implement the controls. You can take business decisions around how you go about dealing with controls. And of course, as I'm sure many of you already know, a control could be too expensive for an organization to implement, in which case you make a decision that says we'll live with the risk. That's a perfectly reasonable approach. The key thing is that it should be documented. And so thinking about an effective transition, the kind of tips that we already find to be working, so this reflects the transition work that we've done with clients, is a gap analysis, logical starting point, but update the policies, do the training and awareness, revise, review, improve your overall training, staff awareness, competence training, get people's certificates upgraded to 2022, make sure that you are transitioning your internal audits to ISO 27001 2022 so that you're auditing alignment with the new standard. Make sure your risk assessment and how it links to the Annex A controls and to the attributes of in ISO 27002 is all clearly documented. The new controls, monitor how well those are working and make sure that you're addressing security incidents. Use all of that to reinforce the value and purpose of your ISO 27001 certification. Increasingly, we're pointing clients at CyberComply as a platform which enables organizations to simplify and speed up their cybersecurity compliance. It's a very easy way to handle transitions because you centrally get all of the changes to documentation. All of that stuff comes down in a way that you can accept it and manage it. It makes it really cost effective for you in the long run to handle maintenance and support of the management system. Really effective way of building cross-organization compliance to multiple systems, recognizing requirements of regulatory and contractual requirements, building those into the management system. CyberComply will map Annex A to a very broad range of other frameworks. So very easy using CyberComply to meet a customer's requirement. Says, hey, we need you to comply with NIST cybersecurity framework. You can go to CyberComply and say, what do I need to do? And CyberComply will tell you these are the changes you will need to make to your existing control mapping. These are the documents you'll need, and you can go away and get on with doing that. So it really can make the long-running implementation of cybersecurity easy to do in a way that is, frankly, reproducible and will give consistent results. So IT governance, as you would expect, we're an ISO 27001 master. We've been doing this for 20 years. This will be our second major transition of clients. We did a big transition of clients in 2013. 2022 is another big transition. There are more than double the number of 27001 certified clients now than there were 9 years ago. So the key solutions we offer is training, upgrade your existing lead auditor, lead implementer, or risk assessment certification, or do a 27001 2022 lead implementer or lead auditor training course. Of course, you need to get copies of the standards. We can come and do a fast track implementation for you. We can give you advice on what the transition might look like. We can work with you if you need additional resource to roll out 27001 changes. We can sell you the Vigilant Software CyberComply platform. All of that in a wonderfully integrated solution, which means that you get staff awareness training, which reflects the same messaging that would appear in one of our internationally accredited staff competence training courses. It all fits together in a way that makes it really easy for an organization to demonstrate 27001 compliance. And ladies and gentlemen, you can get hold of us in the UK, in Europe, or in the US. We have websites and businesses in all of those countries. We contract with clients in all of those regions. We deliver wherever we need them to in a way that's integrated and effective. That's where you can get hold of us. And that brings me to the point of not just saying thank you, but much more importantly, do you have any questions? What questions have you got that you would like me to ask? Remember, in the GoToWebinar box, there's an opportunity to type in questions, so please do that, and Parker will pick up questions. He will read them out, and we'll spend the next 10 minutes or so with me answering. So you can keep putting questions in as well. So Parker, what's our first question?
Okay, so I'll start off with questions. There are a few questions in here asking if the webinar will be re-uploaded to watch later, and I'm just going to answer that. We will have the webinar uploaded on the PJR website. I'm sure I can share it with you so that you can promote it as well. So that handles that. The first question here is, how should we update the SOA for 27017 so that it can be audited against 2700122, as 27017 has not been updated?
27017 and 18, you can include both of them. As far as I know, neither of them have yet been updated to 2022. They're still 2013 control links, but because ISO 27002 2022 gives you the link between the 2013 Annex A and the 2022 Annex A, the controls, it's relatively easy to map 27017 or 18 to the new controls, and therefore to include it in your Annex A reference control set for 2022 compliance.
Okay,
I hope that answers the question. It's not ideal, but it's a practical way of dealing with it.
There's another question here about annex controls. It says, as a client transition, there are ISO 27001 policy documents that map directly to 2013 annex controls. So the question is, if you can merge existing documents such as annex controls into one document, like one annex control to reflect on 2022.
So you can do whatever is practical, frankly. What you need to have is a new statement of applicability, which starts with the 93 controls in Annex A of 2022. So you're going to have a list of controls, and you're going to want to simply say, for these controls, how did I get here? And you might simply say, I'm merging these 4 controls, and I therefore merged the documents. You might have written one document which delivered compliance with 4 controls. So many organizations, many different ways of going about it. But you can merge documents. You can make your documentation as simple as possible, but to quote somebody, no simpler, as simple as possible, so that people can follow it and use it. That's the big driver for documentation. What you want people to do in a way that enables people to follow it. So yes, make the documentation as simple as you can to enable your staff, third parties, whoever has to comply with it, to meet the requirements of that control.
Okay, there's another question for clause 4.2.c. If you have identified a requirement of an interested party, wouldn't that have to be met by an ISMS as it's a requirement? So would it be acceptable to have a single statement like all the above requirements, but be met through the ISMS?
I'm not sure where you would put that statement, but you can certainly, in your documentation which demonstrates compliance with clause 4, you might say, we have a requirement from some customers. I would avoid putting the name of the customer in your management system because customers can change. We have some customers that require us to implement an ISMS as part of contractual compliance, and that is why we've implemented the ISMS. That would be a good reason to implement the ISMS. That will link to your business objectives. One of our business objectives is to win and retain customers, and that includes customers who require us to have an ISMS. So we're mapping and documenting that, but it doesn't absolve you from deciding which of the controls you need to have in place. The individual controls are not necessarily all going to have to be implemented to meet the requirements of that one customer. That one customer might simply be saying they want to know that you've made an intelligent assessment of which controls are applicable to your business and that you're managing them in a consistent and joined up way.
Okay, we have one last question here. How can we arrange next level security training other than basic training? What structure or agenda should one keep in mind while arranging next level security training to their staff?
So it depends entirely on what you mean by next level security training. The kind of levels of training that there are. There is general staff awareness training, which is typically a 40-minute to hour-long offering. So we have in our e-learning business, you can get it through our IT governance businesses, a cybersecurity and ISO 27001 training course, which is about an hour long. It's been certified by the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK. It's a very good basic training on cybersecurity. You can then have foundation level, it's typically a one-day course on ISO 27001 or on GDPR, for instance, or on privacy or on PCI. You've then got a lead implementer or lead auditor course, which is a level up. That's typically a 3-day course with a professional exam at the end of that. They're focused on management systems. And you then get a range of technical qualifications. So you could go on a cybersecurity pathway, which is a cybersecurity foundation course, which is designed for people who might have done an ISO 27001 lead implementer but not have enough technical knowledge. You could do a cybersecurity foundation and then a cybersecurity practitioner training course. The practitioner training course, I think, is a 4-day, either a 3 or 4-day course, again with a chunky exam at the end. You could do more specialized trainings. You could do penetration testing training, all of that driven by what do we need in terms of the competences inside the organization to achieve our information security objectives. And if you go to the IT governance websites, any one of them, EU, UK, or US, you'll be able to see a whole range of training solutions. You'll be able to see what a pathway looks like. There is a cybersecurity pathway and so on. You can then easily work out from that what the kind of training is that you want for your staff, and you can typically buy that all directly through the relevant website.
Okay, we have one last question, and then we'll wrap up here. It's a short one. For planning of changes, would a gap analysis suffice?
Sorry, I missed that. Say that again.
For planning of changes, would gap analysis suffice?
So no, it won't. Your gap analysis identifies what changes you need to make. So you're obviously going to identify that the changes that I talked about in clauses 4 through 10, you're going to go clause 6 needs this change. We have to introduce requirements around. You then need a plan, and the plan could be quite short. It could be change 1 is owned by this person or this department. It is to be executed by this date. But that's what you need. You need a plan which you can go to all the people who have work to do. It's clear to them what they've got to do. It's possible for you then to audit against the fulfillment of that plan. You can identify any roadblocks or issues there might be. There might be resource issues, money issues, budget issues. That gets identified in your plan, and you deal with it, and then you have a plan. And the external auditors will come along and say, show me the gap analysis, where's your plan? Typical, that's great, that's all there. If you show them just a gap analysis, they'll go, where's the plan? And you'll go, well, we just use the gap analysis. They'll go, it says here you need a plan, that's not a plan.
Okay, that's all the questions and time that we have today. But thank you, Alan, for joining us, and thank you, everyone else, for joining us.
Ready, folks, good luck with your 27001 management system. Do come on to any one of our websites if we can help you. We'd love to help you get there in one hit so that you become another leader. Bye-bye.